Well, hello everybody, and welcome to this week's show. This is Into the or High Strangeness in the Liminal Abyss, and I am your show host, SHETAN Noir. Now, this week's subject might not sit well with some people, but I've been seeing an increased trend in both the paranormal world and the cryptozoological world of researchers and investigators who feel the need to bully other researchers when either they have different findings at a location that they've investigated at, or especially in cryptozoology, a researcher stakes claim to a cryptid that has been investigated for, a long time now. So over the weekend, I was harassed by a researcher, and this researcher seems to think that they own this cryptid creature. Now, reports of this creature go back to 1800s, 1700s, even a little bit before that. If you look at the Native American legends of what their stories say were in this body of water. And when anybody asks to examine her in, evidence, or has a different finding than what they do, they immediately become a target on social media. And this harassment, whether they admit to it or not, is private messages, first trying to befriend them, then insulting them, then threatening lawsuits to them, all unfounded. If that doesn't work, then they have other methods of they will fake accounts and start making posts exclaiming, "Oh, this researcher is such a great researcher, and they've done so much for the research and development of this creature." And if you track it back, you can almost always find that it's coming from the same person. But I've also been seeing in the paranormal world where when somebody develops a new technique for researching the paranormal, it is almost immediately chastised by the established community that already does it, with no room given for a interest in opening up how we communicate with the undead or the paranormal. And it's become so much of a point that it's very hard not to get drawn into a conflict or a battle of wills. I try to remain very neutral, even when the attacks come at my personal self or my business, my publication business, or my research. I try to be very diplomatic in my dealings with how I deal with the person. Now, the fact that it's happened to so many other investigators and researchers, I think that there needs to be a call for a movement against the bullying, the threatening, the harassment of putting other people down for one, trying to investigate, because nobody has ownership over cryptozoology or any of the cryptid creatures. If a researcher or investigator is going to claim ownership over a specific cryptid creature, then that draws into question of how did you gain ownership? And if you do have ownership and you are the one and only person who is allowed to investigate that creature or reports of that creature, then how can anybody take your evidence or your findings seriously because you want all the fame and glory for bringing attention to this creature, but you won't let anybody else investigate it or follow up on reports of it, and you are posting all this evidence and data that you've collected, but you attack other researchers when they try to follow up on your research and compare it to what is available, or they try to find their own research and evidence. And so while there's no experts in the paranormal or cryptozoology that is well documented and established, there's also no ownership of a cryptid creature. And people are going to say, oh, well, what about if somebody caught a Bigfoot or some of that? Doesn't that give them ownership? Okay, yes, you would. But the chances of you keeping that creature privately owned, I would say you probably have a 95% chance of having a long, drawn out legal battle with state, federal um, governments over whether you're allowed to own that animal, whether your methods of catching the animal were legal, and for the better good of science and humanity, what should the fate of this animal be? Should you be allowed to keep it in private captivity, or should it be put in a zoo or a facility where it can be kept in a healthy environment, whether it can have blood work done on it, have either medical or veterinarian care given to it? Because if it's a one of a kind, then it's a one of a kind. And what gives anyone the right to own that creature? Now, with paranormal locations, yes, locations, buildings, properties can be privately owned. But most of the time, those owners are looking to recoup some of the cost of upkeep for those buildings, whether it's the property and tax or the building's insurance or utilities or whatever. So they do lease out the facility, the location, the property to paranormal investigators, to film crews, to um, your para celebrities who go in there and state their findings. But then there's all this infrastructure fighting between investigators of, well, we were there and we didn't get that evidence. How did you get that evidence? You must have faked it. Well, just because you're investigating the same location as five other groups or 10 other groups does not mean you're going to get the very same activity or evidence, because the paranormal interacts with people differently. Some people are more open, welcoming to the paranormal to come and interact with. Some people are very abrasive with their interactions with the paranormal. And if they do get any interactions, it's usually very negative, because if you're being disrespectful, why shouldn't they be disrespectful back? But you can have the paranormal trying to act with you, trying to communicate with you. And if you are just not observant to their methods of communication, you might just dismiss everything that you see, hear, smell, or touched. Um, so there's all these different plausibilities of, well, we just investigated there a month ago and we didn't get that activity, or we're going there next weekend and man, we hope that all this stuff happens to us and that we get it all on film so that everybody believes us. And so you've got so many different discrepancies, and really, both communities, there has to be a neutral zone where just everybody can come together and share their findings, share their evidence, without one group or another calling out the other group and saying, "Oh, well, you're faking that. There's no way that happened," or "Here's all of my evidence, but nobody's allowed to examine it. I'm offering my evidence up to the highest bidder for whoever can pay me the big bucks to be on their show or to put me in their magazine or on their podcast. And then they can have, a look at my evidence. But don't you dare, claim that, I'm hoaxing my evidence or I'll sue you." Um, because there's too much of that going on. And it's ridiculous. It really is ridiculous. And if researchers and investigators of the paranormal and cryptozoology, if we want to be taken seriously by the scientific communities and by just the norm of populace, then this ridiculous behavior just needs to stop. Now, I'm not saying that there's not controversies and ridiculous behavior in other areas of science. Certainly, even though I love paleontology, some of the feuds and quarrels and arguments that I've seen going on about different species and misinterpretation of species and new insight into species. Um, wow, you can just sit back and just shake your head at it. Um, Same thing with the difference between ufology and uh, you know s- space programs. There's so much that we don't know out there that we should really be applying ourselves to understanding that we don't know, instead of arguing and fighting with people about whether a location is going to provide the same evidence for every single person who goes into it, or whether you're allowed to go research a cryptid creature. Because if that was the case, then I'm pretty sure Bob Gimlin should be able to say, "Well, nobody's allowed to go investigate Bigfoot because me and Patterson, we're the ones who got the document, footage of him. We own him." But that's not the case. They have welcomed everybody to go out and look for Bigfoot. It's actually a national pastime for different locations in the United States, of people going out and going Bigfooting and looking for these creatures. But I'm seeing more and more where a new creature sighting pops up, and suddenly you have one or two investigators who say, "Oh, I'm the one getting all the reports for that, and nobody's allowed to interview my witnesses or look at my evidence. You'll have to read the book when it comes out." And when you dispute their eyewitness reports or their, statements that are made public, suddenly you have a target on you. And really, this is counterproductive to the whole scientific analysis of evidence collecting and researching and eyewitness reports. Because if the people giving us their eyewitness witness reports cannot rely on us, the researchers, to act like professionals, then why should they give us their eyewitness testimony? Why should they give us any evidence? Why should they not point us in the right direction of a creature that we might be looking for, or a paranormal location? Because why would they want the reputation of that location or the existence of this creature to be muddied by the constant infighting and bickering and insulting and just trashing of everybody's reputations and the evidence that people are trying to research and examine? I don't know. I guess it would be interesting to see what other people's take on this would be, and what the general consensus is. Do other people feel that this is a major problem within the two communities, or is this just something that we should accept and be okay with because maybe somebody just want to see the paranormal communities burn and the cryptozoology, uh, you know, communities dissolve and it be done with, and nobody talks about Bigfoot or UFOs or ghosts or anything like that anymore. Um, yeah, so that is my show for this week. As always, go out there and explore this wonderful world and stay curious out there. And until next week, have fun.